You are listening to the 16th broadcast of TBR Radios, the TBR History Hour, with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Edward DeVries. In today's show, Dr. Ed calls TBR writer Clint Lacy to talk about his newly released best-selling book, The Rape of Delaware County. In it, Clint tells the story of a corrupt county, a corrupt sheriff's office, and corrupt prosecutors who almost succeeded in pinning an attempted murder charge on an innocent man in hopes that it would prevent the greater community from discovering police informants cooking meth, the disappearance of Native American women, and all kinds of other corrupt goings-on in his rural Oklahoma county.
I can't see your hat. Are you wearing a Trump hat or a Confederate flag hat? Okay.
It's a Trump.
Okay.
I got one of each, though.
So how's Foothills Publishing coming along?
Well, I just did the books for this year, or for last year. We broke even.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's good. At least you're not losing money. Tell me the story of how you came into the story that became the Rape of Delaware County.
Yeah, you know what? This is my own, personal Tiger King. Well, I was friends with Edwin Turlington on Facebook. I didn't know him real well. We'd kind of messaged each other a few times. And one day he makes this post, something about him possibly going to jail for 10 years for shooting this trespasser on his land. So I thought, what in the world? So I contacted him, told me this crazy story. It's almost too crazy to be real, but it is real. He had just, retired from the military and moved back to Oklahoma. Delaware County, Oklahoma is about 4 miles from Missouri and maybe, 5 to 10 miles from Arkansas. So traditionally, it's always been a place where people tended to hide from justice. So he had purchased this place, and his brother purchased the adjoining land so he wouldn't have to get an easement. And he said he was working on his house one night, trying to get it ready to move into, and he seen a fire on the property. He went down there to investigate it, and 3 shady guys were down there. He thinks they were making shake and bake meth. So he told him to get off his land, and an argument ensued. So he shot him one time in the leg with his .380 caliber handgun. Buddies hopped in a truck and tore out of there. Now, another clue that they weren't doing something legal. He called his brother, who was an attorney, and his brother said, "You need to call the police." So he called the police, and when he went into Jay, Oklahoma, to make a statement about it, they arrested him. The undersheriff or deputy of Delaware County was a guy by the name of Gale Wells, and he went to Arkansas to a hospital that the perpetrator, whose name was Jerry Philpott, had went to. Well, as it turns out, Jerry Philpott changed his clothes after getting shot to go to the hospital, and which is another clue that something unusual was going on. They arrested Edwin Turlington, meanwhile in Jay, Oklahoma.
Edward Turlington was the undersheriff, correct?
No, Gale Wells was the undersheriff. Edwin Turlington is the one that shot the perpetrator who attacked him.
Okay.
And they charged him, I believe, with attempted murder. This was a non-lethal round to Jerry Philpott's leg. And Edwin provided me with the transcripts from the interview that Deputy Wells did with Jerry Philpott in the hospital. He said he gave some kind of stupid reason for changing his clothes. He said they was at his cousin's house. And you could read the transcripts, and it appeared to Edwin, and it appeared to me as well, the sheriff was kind of coaching or leading not the sheriff, the deputy was kind of coaching Philpott in his answers to his questions. Like, for instance, he said, are you employed? He said, no. And he said, well, do you work on anything? He said, sometimes lawnmowers, whatever. He said, oh, so you're a handyman. And all this went into Edwin Turlington's arrest affidavit. Well, Deputy Wells took pictures of Jerry Philpott's leg in the hospital. There were 2 color photos that did not make it into the affidavit, high-resolution color photos. But what did make it into Edwin Turlington's arrest affidavit was 2 very grainy, low-resolution photos. And the first one is taken kind of at a distance. The second one is showing the exit wound of Turlington's shot into Philpott. But you can't really tell. It's so blurry. And Deputy Wells concludes that Turlington shot Philpott in the back of the leg while Philpott was fleeing. But in the high-resolution color photos, you can tell that Turlington shot Philpott in the front of the leg because the bullet wound is very small and exited through the back of the leg, which the wound is larger. This was confirmed in the ER nurse's notes that said that the wound was from the front to the back. This backs up Turlington's story that Philpott charged him with a bottle. Well, Philpott's explanation for charging Edwin with the bottle was, I just picked up the bottle to see if it had any water in it to put the fire out. We did some checking, and it had not rained in Delaware County, Oklahoma for 2 weeks. So there wouldn't have been any water in the bottle. So this kind of began a journey between Edwin and I, a lot of communication with each other. And I wrote several articles on one of my blogs about it. And Edwin kind of urged me to write a book. And we started doing that. It's my belief that him telling everybody about the book, and it's his belief too. I mean, he told me from April 14th to 5th of 2019, he had that hanging over his head. You know, he was supposed to sign a contract when this book was getting ready to come out. And it was very upfront. You know, we'd split it 50-50. There's a clause in there. If he didn't like the way things were going in 3 months, he could have the rights to his book back and do whatever he wanted to with it. The only thing I asked is that he bore the liability for the information he gave me. He called me July 5th, telling me the charges had been dropped. I sent him the contract a day or 2 later. He went radio silent on me. I could not get him to answer any type of text or Facebook message or Skype message or phone calls. And finally, a few days later, he told me basically he was insulted by the contract. I contacted an attorney. Attorney asked me if it was copyrighted. I said, yeah, I had it copyrighted. Attorney told me to cut off all contact with him. I did. So it was really strange. I sat on this book for a year until I saw Edwin released his own version of it. So I thought, well, you know what? I got the copyright on this book. He can do what he wants to, but I'm going to release my version, which I did. And I found out a lot of stuff investigating this book. It wasn't just Edwin. Like when Edwin said he was in jail, somebody said, you messed up. You shot a snitch. And he got to digging in. He provided me with all this information. But Jerry Philpott, the guy he shot, had a rap sheet that was probably 3 pages long, starting in 1981, and the last one, I believe, was in 2018. A lot of violent stuff, a lot of drug charges, DWIs, domestic assaults, personal orders of protection against him. There was even dash cam footage or car footage, whatever you want to call it, one time when he was arrested in Benton County, Arkansas, and the deputy that arrested him was black, and Philpott appeared to be high on meth. And when I tell you this man sounded like a demon, I'm not exaggerating. This man was howling and screaming and sounded like a demon, saying that, you know, he would effing kill this deputy, call him the N-word. I mean, tried to kick out the back glass. But somehow this guy operated freely in Delaware County, Oklahoma, when he had arrest warrants in Missouri and Arkansas. So you kind of get the picture that this guy was protected, and that's why they tried to they did charge Edwin and tried to throw him in jail for 10 years. Now, all this sounds pretty strange. So I guess to investigating the county in general, and found out that there was so much abuse in the county jail by the jailers that a group of women sued the county jail for $13.5 million. It might have been higher. That's what the county settled. $13.5 million, and these charges included rape, harassment, abuse. It was so high that the county had to raise property taxes to pay the lawsuit caused by the abuse of these jailers.
So were these jailers deputies, or were they just jail employees? Or
they were, I guess they were deputies, but they ran the jail. And a lot of it was coercion to have sex. One woman said she was handcuffed outside of her cell for 7 or 8 hours, I believe. Was sexually assaulted by a trustee. Others say that the jailers themselves sexually assaulted them. And before you start thinking, well, it can't get much worse than fiction, stuff comes out. The original defense attorney that Edwin Turlington hired to defend him charged him $10,000. When it came time for the arraignment, he kind of laid down on Edwin, didn't really do a very good job of trying to defend him. After the charges couldn't be dismissed, this same attorney told Edwin, well, I'll need an additional $20,000 to $30,000. Almost like he laid down in order to charge him this additional money. In January of last year, the attorney, whose name was Winston Connor, made international headlines in the United Kingdom's newspaper, the Daily Mail. When he came back from a trip from the islands, he was arrested by federal authorities in a murder-for-hire plot. It was murder for hire, and he had his hands in a local prostitution ring. And this guy used to be the assistant district attorney, prosecutor. And so this little bitty obscure place, a few miles from Missouri and Arkansas and Oklahoma, first of all, you find that they're protecting this felon, drug and violent felon in their state and their county. Then you find out the abuse was so bad in the jails that they settled for $13.5 million, had to raise their property taxes. Then you find out the guy that Edwin originally hired to defend him was arrested getting off a plane after being out of the country in a murder-for-hire plot. He actually went to a prison and visited an inmate and tried to get him to knock somebody else off in jail. So yeah, it's kind of a stranger than fiction story, but it's all real. And I did a lot of research and verified that it's real. Like, since that lawsuit was settled with the female inmates, I wonder what's happened from 2016 to 2020. It's an ongoing thing. I found where 2 jailers were suspended. They told them they would give them an e-cigarette if they let them tase them. And they got caught doing that. And you just have to wonder, where are they finding these people at? Because it already cost them $13.5 million from their last transgressions. And, those jailers have been replaced with new ones. The new ones are abusing inmates. And another theme that's quite common there, I found, was people attempting to murder other people to prevent him from testifying in court. There was a case of, I believe it was 2 women. They stabbed somebody at a local hotel, and come to find out they did it to try and keep somebody from testifying against them in court. There was also the case of 2 parents who had a young child, and another woman had come over to party with them. They injected her with a large dose of meth, watched her overdose and die, then called 911 trying to cover it up. And as it turns out, that woman was going to testify in court against them. And there was a third instance of this. So missing people, murders, crooked politicians, crooked cops. I mean, it's all there. I mean, it'd
your
be
web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
The book that you've written, The Rape of Delaware County, is, I'm guessing then that the reason you chose the title The Rape of Delaware County wasn't just the one incident that started you digging into this, but it's everything. It's all of the things happening in jail, all of the things happening in their courts, all of the things happening, their sheriff's department's crooked, their prosecutor's office is crooked, their courts are crooked. I'm going to guess their commissioners are crooked, and their city's mayors are crooked. I'm going to guess it's just crooked all the way across.
It's crooked all the way across. The criminals there are on a entirely different level than criminals in other rural communities. There's so much more crime than there should be in a little rural community or county like Delaware County, and the crimes that do occur are much more violent than you see in other rural areas. Corrupt, dirty little place.
So what is the population of Delaware County?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that offhand. I want to say like between 40 and 60,000 people. That's probably on the high end.
Okay.
I think it's more like 40. The county I live in is only about 8,000 people. That's to the extreme low. But if you compare a city, like about 30 miles from where I live is Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I think it's got close to 40,000 people. You don't see that kind of crime.
Right.
There's shootings, but it's so close to Illinois that it's tied into that. But you don't see the prisoner abuse. You don't see the attorneys getting arrested in murder for hire plots. You don't see the attempted murders for trying to prevent people from testifying in court against them. It's just really unusually high. It's really strange. In one description of the book, I said Delaware County, Oklahoma used to be a safe haven for outlaws. Today it still is, only some of them wear badges while others have law degrees hanging on the law.
Right.
It's just fascinating stuff. I mean, I just found it all really hard to believe.
So was the original story, is it still the greater portion of what's in your book, or was that just the introduction to what ended up becoming another book?
That's generally the book. There's some things about my interactions with Edwin Turlington. I truly believe Edwin was innocent and was well within his rights to shoot this guy. But there was something I found out that he wasn't honest with me about, was that he was arrested for threatening somebody a year before this happened. And I asked him about it. He became very defensive about it, said that has no bearing on this case whatsoever. And I said, yeah, okay, Edwin, I get that. But if I found it, anybody else is going to find it if they want to. And it's better for you to get ahead of this and tell the truth about it. And basically, he told me, this is the weird part. I believe it happened in Texas County. Anyway, it was at a relative's home, and somebody was walking through her yard. He got into it with them, threatened them. They both walked their separate ways, and that guy went to the police, and he got arrested. And the reason I found it, it was in a law journal because he lost his appeal. They said that the appeals court said, well, you didn't have to actually act on your threat. The fact that you made the threat means you're guilty. But I think that might have been expunged because I went on the Oklahoma courts online page. I can't find any trace of it now. But the law journal, I mean, it's there forever. So
right.
What I do think is Edwin has a pretty bad temper at times and makes rash decisions. Again, I think he was innocent and well within his rights to shoot this guy. But I also think that, you know, if he'd maybe take a couple extra seconds longer before he made his decisions, he wouldn't be put in this position again.
Right. So when you said that he had said the contract was offensive to him, was it just because he was trying to hold out for more money, or?
It just boggled my mind because the contract had in there exactly what I told him. At the very first, he said, you know, I don't want anything. I don't want my name on the book. I don't need any money, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, Edwin, if you're helping me do the research, I'll split the profits with you, you know. And he was fine with that. But as soon as those charges got dropped, his whole tune changed quickly. Then he sent me a counter offer, you know, where he would have control of the book. Mm-hmm. And there's other little things that happened throughout our process. Like I was talking to him on Skype one night, and he said, Clint, why don't you let me buy you a new laptop? I'm like, well, why, Edwin? This one works just fine. Well, you really need a new one to do more things with. You know, I'd be happy to send you one. I was like, I thought that was a little odd, but I thought, well, maybe he's just trying to be gracious. And I said, no, I'm fine, but thank you. Well, then next came, I made it clear from the beginning. I said, if I do this book, it's going to be through my company. Mm-hmm. Well, the next thing I know, he's trying to get it published through a company in his area that he has connections with. And he did copy me on the emails, but he's talking to this lady about what the front cover needs to look like, what the price is going to be, details of the book. So I emailed her back. I said, ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding. I said, I'm not looking for another printer. I said, it's going to be through my company. And I said, should I ever need your services? And I said, then I'll keep you in mind. She said, okay. So, and he continued to push me to try and go through this other company, saying, well, he angered or offended when I sent him the contract. I guess he maybe felt like, well, my word should have been good enough. His word.
Right.
But that doesn't cut it. You know, you have no legal standing. You used to get by in this world on a handshake and look at somebody in the eye. And that has no legal standing today in the time in which we live. You'd better cover your ass. And having this hang over him for 5 years. And it had to be tremendous. And then having a 10-year prison sentence hang over your head, it's hard saying.
Right. So do you think that he actually was getting other offers to print this book, or do you think he was just trying to take it over because that's just the way he is?
Man, I don't know. I can only speculate. But maybe I don't want to say anything that I don't know for sure.
Okay. Fair enough.
But it sure seemed to me like he was trying to take control of the book. Actually, he's in copyright violation right now. The Rape of Delaware County, he used that in his subtitle.
Okay.
But is it worth pursuing? Probably not. So, and like I said earlier, I was just going to sit on this book, but then I seen he released his own version, and I thought, well, there's no reason for me to sit on this any longer.
Well, was his version self-published, or was it something that somebody else had done for him? Or
well, that's the weird thing. This other publisher, he ended up starting his own company. So he ended up not using her. But then again, that might have been because when he backed out and the lawyer said to send everybody you had contact with about this a receipt of the copyright, tell them you own the rights, I sent her one of those too. She wasn't real happy about it. She got real defensive. I say, hey, I'm just telling you, I own the copyright on this. Mm-hmm. So, why didn't he use her when he was so adamant about it? It's the problem is I'm a sucker for a good story. And this was an amazing story. He just kind of sucked me in. And he would say things like, if these charges get dropped, it's because of you, Clint. And I'm not saying that as an ego thing, because there's no really ego to this. But he would say things like that, and he didn't know, I guess he didn't know about all the rapes in the jail and all that. Because I said, hey, have you heard about this stuff? And he'd send me another message back and said, damn, Clint, you know more about this than me. But when it came time to sign the contract, he bailed.
Right. So the version of the book then that he published, are they basically the same book, or was his version materially different from the one that you had already written, or?
From what I can see, he just stuck to his case and didn't really branch out into the broader areas like I did, the greater corruption within the county. But as far as I can tell, it's, they're different in that manner.
Right. And I'm not saying that if there was a discrepancy in the version of events that would be, any fault of yours. I mean, it's one thing to tell the events as an outside observer, and it's another thing to tell the events as the person who actually lived through it. And to some degree, you may not have as much motivation as he would have to embellish the story, or to, make himself look different in the story, or, in other words, there might be reasons why he would want the story to turn out differently than it actually turned out. So if you say yes to this question, you're not incriminating yourself, in other words. But the version of events that you tell in your story and the version of events that he tells in his, are they the same, or is there a discrepancy there?
Well, I'm confident he didn't write down that he had a previous charge.
Right.
He was against that when I was working with him. But I will say this: all the information he had was through Freedom of Information Act, arrest affidavits, video of Philpott being arrested in the car, things of that nature, which he shared with me. So all that's in mine. I still think the main difference is that I covered his story and the greater corruption. Mm-hmm. In other words, it started off with him, and then he became a part of a larger story.
Okay.
In my research, I also found out there seems to be a problem with missing Native American women in Oklahoma. And one of them turned up missing in Delaware County. And they still haven't solved that one yet.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States. The things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Do you think, though, that would be corruption on the part of tribal police or something that's going on within the various tribes that the tribal authorities just don't want to deal with? Or do you think that that's something that is actually part of the greater corruption, there in Delaware County or maybe some of the other counties as well?
It seems to me, and this is just my opinion, any position of power in that county seems to be easily corrupt. It's just a corrupt area. It's an opportunity area for crime. And in the case of Philpott, that man should have never walked. Never walked. But yet he did. And he seemed to move about Delaware County, Oklahoma very freely without a problem, when he always seemed to have warrants in Missouri and Arkansas. So there's kind of hints that you have to ask why. But was he a snitch, or was there something more to this?
Well,
we can only speculate on that.
When I was a kid, I had a neighbor. His name was Rich. And he was a state trooper for the Illinois Highway Patrol. He used to give me the coolest stuff. I mean, I remember one time he gave me a dirt bike, and one time he gave me a video game system. One time he gave me a television. One time, he gave me a bicycle. I mean, just different things. And the dirt bike was actually like a motorcycle type dirt bike. One time he gave me a go-kart, whatever. And every time I'd ask him, I'd say, cool. I said, where'd you get this or whatever? And he'd tell me, how they had he was a narcotics officer, basically. So, you know, they'd done a drug bust somewhere, and, you know, they would take everything, and, you know, some of the stuff these guys would just wind up, you know, taking themselves. And so, you know, he did. He gave me all kinds of cool stuff that got confiscated in these drug busts. But, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years later, his wife left him. And the reason his wife left him was, come to find out, that not only was he, you know, one of the head narcotics officers for the Illinois Highway Patrol, he was also one of the biggest drug dealers in the state of Illinois. And he was also running prostitutes, and of course he was fooling around with them, and that's what caused his wife to leave him. You know, she was happy enough for him to deal drugs and make money. but when
he flew too close to the sun, didn't he?
Yeah. Yep. But my point being, and I think you already know what it is, that you know, sometimes those you know, in law enforcement sometimes are the biggest criminals. And so it's possible that you know, the people who were, you know, going after all the drugs in the county were really just knocking out their competition because, you know, they wanted to be the big whatever. And so, do you think that this guy was actually dealing drugs or doing whatever for maybe some deputies or some county commissioners, or, you know, somebody somebody in a position of prominence there within the county government or law enforcement, and that's why he was able to get away with the things he got away with?
That could be one reason. I don't have any proof of that.
Okay.
Another reason could be, you know, the cops, they get a snitch, and one snitch can generate many more arrests. But, you know, a guy with that many felonies that was caught. The only thing I know about why Edwin Turlington thought Jerry Philpott was making meth on his property was he had some campfire fuel there, you know, on a pallet. It had a lot of the signs of a shake and bake meth, what would be a shake and bake meth operation. So, you know, he should have been dead to rights, as they say. He should have been arrested. Why did he change his clothes? Probably because they smelled like meth.
Well, if Turlington's cellmate knew that Philpott was a snitch, probably a lot of the other criminal element around town knew that he was a snitch as well. So how valuable could he have been?
Yeah, it has 2 to 3 pages of prior arrest and convictions. That's no exaggeration. Mm-hmm. And like I said, they go from 1981 to 2018. And as I stated previously, they're violent acts, they're drug acts. I believe one was sex with a minor. It's a very long, sordid list. This man should never be allowed to come and go through that county freely like he was. The fact that what it appeared to be the deputy coaching him through the interview, the deputy omitting clear pictures of the wounds and replacing them with, very grainy black and white photos. Mm-hmm. It obviously appeared to me that he was protecting this man. Why would they want to put a guy away for 10 years that was defending himself on his family's property? It's all very, very sketchy stuff. Right. And like I said, it read like a fiction novel, but unfortunately it's true, and it's still going on there. Just go to Google or whatever search engine and type in Delaware County, Oklahoma. Click the news tab, and just you're free for some very long reading. Okay. A lot of sketchy stuff. I don't even know if Jerry Philpott is still alive. And I did another search on him trying to find convictions, and that's for a man that's that criminally active, you know, it was rumored he was in very bad health, so I don't know if he's still alive or not.
So how old was he?
He's in his late 50s now, or if he's alive, he's in his late 50s. So he was probably in his early to mid 50s at the time, and he looked a lot older than that from his mug shots, quite frankly. And if you was to listen to that video from inside the police car, it gives you chills. This man, I am not exaggerating, like I said before, he sounds like a demon when he's high. Mm-hmm. And it's just very odd that they would take a guy that was a veteran on his own property who was defending themselves and just try and throw him in jail, lock him in jail and throw away the key. It's all very odd. Like I said, I think Edwin Turlington was innocent, but I also kind of got glimpses here and there that he could be a controlling person at times and that he could lose his temper and act rashly at times too.
So I'm going to put some speculation out there, and I realize you might not want to answer this question authoritatively because, again, like you've said before, you don't want to say things that you do not know 100% for sure that they're true. But do you think that maybe that the reason that they came down on him so hard was because they were afraid that he would find out what was really going on his property, and then, perhaps when they realized that with all the things that you found, maybe you didn't really find out what was happening on that property that night. And so is it possible that they, at that point, then dropped the charges just to get the dogs off the scent, if you will? I mean, maybe y'all were getting close to something but didn't find it?
Well, the property was foreclosed upon. It was a foreclosure property when Edwin bought it. So it's very possible that they thought nobody owned it, and that's why they were on that property doing what they were doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's all very shady. I mean, they shouldn't be this protective over a guy with that kind of record.
Well, that's the point. They had to protect him because if they didn't protect him, he would roll over on whoever it was that had hired him. And I'm implying that it was the same people who were protecting him. And again, I realize you don't want to come out and say that. But again,
nothing definitive on that. But a speculative person can connect the dots. Mm-hmm. It's certainly a possibility. Previous sheriff of that county had resigned for various reasons. It's just an ongoing thing that doesn't stop. Right. The abuse in the jails doesn't stop. The murders to try and take people out, or the attempted murders to try and take people out to prevent them from testifying, doesn't stop. The drugs never stopped. Usually a guy that was a former assistant DA, those guys are pretty, generally speaking, they're pretty uncorruptible. And Connor was involved in a murder for hire plot. It's amazing. It shouldn't be that violent, but people have no qualms about shooting somebody there for whatever reason.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Confederate symbols and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
So you had mentioned before that there was a lot of women that were turning up missing on the various Indian tribes there in Oklahoma. I know that in New Mexico that they have a lot of what they call checkerboard land, and I assume the same situation applies in Oklahoma as well. And this checkerboard land is basically where the tribal property is scattered throughout a county or even across several counties, and it's not necessarily connected. So you have a large stretch of land that's tribal authority, and then a large stretch of land that is not tribal, and so the regular authorities would have jurisdiction there, and then you got another patch of land that's tribal and so forth. You know, does any of that come into play in Delaware County, or particularly into this story, or, you know, as far as into some of the places where some of the stuff is happening in that county? Is that at play at all?
I really don't know, and to be honest, I didn't know about this checkerboard situation. I just found out by searching crimes in Delaware County and found that, well, actually, she was a transgender Native American girl. She had moved away and came back, and then promptly turned up missing.
Okay.
And they haven't been able to find this individual, and that's how I discovered it was a greater problem throughout Oklahoma.
Okay. Well, I know when I lived in New Mexico, it was always an issue with people. You know, you'd call the 911, for example, and you'd give them your address, and they're like, "Oh, well, we can't respond to that. You have to call the whatever, you know, because the person happened to live on tribal land." And so the tribal police had to respond to it, or the tribal fire department, you know, had to respond to it, or the EMTs from the tribal whatever had to respond to it. Or else, you know, sometimes some of the Indian folks would even call the tribal whatever, and they're like, "Well, no, you live in the county or whatever, so you got to call, you know." And the county's
very confusing.
Yeah, and it was very confusing. Or, you know, some people, you know, even had property. We had one person in the church that his house was in the county, and his barn and some of his other property where he kept his cows and stuff was on tribal land. And so, you know, like if his house was on fire, he would call 911, but if his barn was on fire, he'd have to call the tribal authority. Or if his cows, you know, if something happened with his cattle, he'd have to call the tribal authority. But, you know, if something happened over in this other pasture, then, you know, maybe he would call, you know, the regular, you know, whatever. So,
yeah, I don't know if that exists there or not. Just to be quite honest.
But I can see where that would shield corruption on both sides.
Oh, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. You know, when I was researching this book, I went back a long ways, and there's a big lake there called the Grand Lake of the Cherokee. And when it was being built, I believe in the 80s, I found where a politician, I believe he was a state rep, he even got busted or got caught basically embezzling money from funds to build this lake. It's just like anything that goes on there, somebody's trying to find a, no matter if it's legal or illegal, or it certainly seems to be the picture there. And a lot of people get away with it.
Right.
I know after researching this book, I would not want to live there.
So how far is that away from where you live?
Well, I'm in eastern Missouri, and that's in eastern Oklahoma, so...
so there's a good little distance there then.
Yeah, I would say there's probably about 6 hours. But it's kind of weird because, you know, the Ozarks go into eastern Oklahoma, and they start pretty much in eastern Missouri. So it's almost an Ozark thing, too. And you always have corruption in little counties, little towns, rural areas. But I have to tell you, this county makes mine look honest. you might think your area is corrupt until you read this book, and you'll say, okay, things aren't so bad here.
So have you had any blowback or fallout from anybody over there in Delaware County for the things that you've written?
Not as of yet. Of course, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. I've recently had a few newspaper inquiries about the book coming out, so I sent them a copy of the book so they can read it and get back to me. Mm-hmm. They said it sounded very interesting. So, but no, that's no secret there. Everybody in that area and everybody in the surrounding areas of Missouri and Arkansas, they know that it is. So it's an open secret. They know.
Right.
And it's in the news as well. There's things happening every week. You can go and check it. Somebody's always being shot, stabbed, whatever. And I'm not, I'm not trying to make this bigger than what it is. It's just a fact. You search the news in that area and you'll see these things happening. But it is a fascinating story of, one man just minding his own business, trying to fix his house up to live, and he's seen some suspicious character, gets attacked, defends himself, and next thing you know, he's facing 10 years. And then he gets to digging on the guy, finds out that the guy they're protecting has this humongously long rap sheet. And then you read about the lawsuits of the inmate. I don't know too many places where it's a pretty common theme of inmates getting raped and abused. And they fire jailers and hire new ones who abuse their prisoners. It's, where are they finding these people to be jailers at?
Right.
And it's not uncommon. I mean, it is uncommon for a former district attorney, wherever you live, or a defense attorney. They don't usually get arrested for murder for hire plots and make international headlines.
Right.
And that's what sucked me into the story. I'm like, good grief, can this be real? And when I start reading about it and doing my research, looking over the stuff he sent me, I'm like, my God, this is real. This really happens.
So you had said that you were friends with Turlington on Facebook. So how did that even start?
He had read some of my articles and friended me, and we would message back and forth occasionally, not very often. But when I showed interest in the story about him going to jail, well, we started communicating a lot. I think I wrote 3 or 4 articles using information that he gave me about what was happening there. And, and then we started talking about writing a book together. And like I said, it all just kind of, the closer it came to the charges being dropped, the more it fell apart. Mm-hmm. And I can only speculate about that. Did he truly plan to sign the contract all along, or was this part of a plan to slowly take control of the book? I don't know. I can't honestly answer that question.
Maybe he was just working you to write the book, and then he would have something, a manuscript that he could work with, and in other words, he didn't feel like he could write a book himself, but he had you working the book for him.
Well, I don't want to say anything that get me sued, but there were things that were happening that I began to notice that were highly unusual. Mm-hmm. I don't, why would you say, sure, we'll do it through your company, and then all of a sudden have a problem with it when I send you a contract?
Right.
Yeah. But then again, maybe, like I said, maybe the stress of all that bearing down on him just finally kicked in. I have no idea, and I made for a good book, good mm-hmm. story, a true story, but I don't want to ever delve into this again with him. And that's why I said this whole thing has been like my Tiger King. If you've seen that series on Netflix, the guy gets sucked in about this. Ironically, that it's about Oklahoma as well. This guy gets sucked in. He was going to make a reality show about the zoo owner, and he gets sucked in and notices things aren't going the way they should be, and it pretty much ruined his whole life. This hasn't ruined my life, but, you know, when you work so hard on something, especially when you think it's going to help somebody out, and as soon as the charges are dropped against them, they turn on you like that, it makes you wonder. All I have to say to him is, you know what? I wish you the best. I'm glad you got out of it. I hope you're smart enough not to get in this situation again.
All right.
And that's really all I'm going to say about it. I wish him a very well life. I just don't want anything to do with it.
Well, I can fully understand that.
Yeah. So, but that's it in a nutshell.
And that is our show for this week's TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to Clint in probably a couple of months now. And so I enjoyed the opportunity to kind of reconnect with him. And even after this interview here, we continued our conversation and we started talking about the coronavirus and, you know, just basically what's going on in Missouri right now with the coronavirus. I know, of course, what's happening here in Maryland because I live here. And I know what's going on in Florida because I have family and friends there that I'm still in regular contact with. And I know what's going on in a few other places because people are telling me. But I really didn't know how things were going, you know, there in the middle part of the country, there in Missouri, in some of those areas. And so I took the opportunity to ask Clint, and we had that conversation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that on my other radio show this week, TBR Histories, or rather TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show. And so if you flip over to the Dixie Heritage Show, you'll be able to hear that conversation. One interesting thing about Clint Lacy, in addition to writing for TBR and writing books and trying to get a publishing company off the ground, for a number of years, Clint has been working at the factory where they make Bounty paper towels and some toilet paper and some other things. And so I kind of talked to him about, you know, that a little bit because, hey, there's been a paper towel shortage and toilet paper shortages and everything else with the coronavirus as well. So I'll go to www.barnesreview.org, www.barnesreview.org, click the radio tab, flip over to my other show, TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show. Listen to that conversation with Clint about all the goofiness going on with the coronavirus in the state of Missouri. And while you're on the TBR website, go ahead and find out how you can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review magazine, because this really is one of the greatest magazines that you will ever subscribe to. And that's why I'm affiliated with it. Or maybe it's great because I'm affiliated with it. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of that. But in any event, you will not go wrong and you will not regret subscribing to the Barnes Review or purchasing any of a number of wonderful books from the TBR bookstore. But I do want you to know that in the event that you are dissatisfied with the Barnes Review or one of the books that you purchase, you can always get a money-back guarantee. Although I'll tell you right now, you're not going to do that. And I'll tell you why you're not going to do that, because even if you are dissatisfied, and you're not going to be dissatisfied, but if you were dissatisfied, as I said a moment ago, there is a toilet paper shortage. And so you can never have enough paper products in your home right now. But I know you're not going to be using the Barnes Review for that purpose. Maybe you'll use U.S. News and World Report or Time Magazine or, National Geographic or any of those other rags for that purpose. But I guarantee the Barnes Review will not wind up being used for that purpose. Although, when you are sitting on the throne and making the necessity of using those other publications for that purpose, the Barnes Review is good reading material. How did I get into this? I don't know. Anyways, we are out of time, so I am going to change the subject by saying from all of us here at TBR Radio, until next week, same time, same place, God bless, see you soon.